My parents confessed they liquidated my entire college fund to bankroll my brother Mason's doomed startup, so I left without a word. 10 years later, they're bankrupt, he's a fraud, and they came begging to me, unaware I now own the debt on their house. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the kitchen wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air in a room moments before a flash fire. I was 21 years old, holding a thin, crinkled bank statement in a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. The paper felt flimsy, insignificant, yet the numbers printed in stark black ink had just dismantled the entire trajectory of my life. "It's gone," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, thin and reedy, stripped of the confidence I had felt only an hour ago when I walked into the bank to withdraw the deposit for my graduate program housing. The account, the trust grandmother left for my education, it's zero. My mother, Margaret, didn't look up from her tea. She was tracing the rim of her floral mug with a manicured fingernail, round and round, a nervous tic I had watched her develop over years of covering up small inconveniences. But this wasn't a small inconvenience. This was 6 figures. This was my future. My father, Matthew, stood by the window, his back to me. He was watching the rain batter the pristine landscaping of the suburban home I had grown up in, a home that always felt just a little too perfect, a little too staged. He cleared his throat, a rough, dismissive sound. "It's not gone, Anna," Matthew said, finally turning around. His face was composed, wearing that mask of paternal wisdom he put on whenever he was about to explain why I was wrong. "It's been reallocated. We made an investment." "An investment?" I choked out, the nausea rising in my throat. "You forged my signature. That money was in a trust. You couldn't touch it without my consent unless you forged it." "Don't use such dramatic language," Margaret snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were hard, lacking even a flicker of guilt. "We did what families do. We supported each other. Your brother, Mason, had an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Tech is the future, Anna. You know how brilliant he is." "Mason, of course. It was always Mason." "You gave my tuition money to Mason?" I asked, the realization hitting me like a physical blow to the stomach. "For what? His app, the one that disrupts dog walking? Dad, you told me that money was sacrosanct. You told me to study hard, to get into the best program because the funding was there." "And you did study hard," Matthew said, stepping forward and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. I flinched away as if he were burning me. "We're proud of you. But let's be realistic, Anna. Accounting, it's safe. It's fine. But Mason is building an empire. He needed capital for the seed round. Investors want to see skin in the game. We had to show them we believed in him." "So you stole from me," I said, my voice rising, finally cracking the oppressive quiet of the house. "You stole my safety net to gamble on Mason, who hasn't finished a single thing he started in his life." "He is your brother." Margaret slammed her mug down, tea sloshing onto the oak table. "And he is going to be a CEO. When his company takes off, he will pay you back 10 times over. You should be thanking us for investing your stagnant money into something with actual growth potential. You're being incredibly selfish, Anna, thinking only of your little degree when Mason is trying to change the world." I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time. I didn't see my parents. I saw 2 people who were so desperate to live vicariously through their golden child that they were willing to cannibalize their other child to feed him. They didn't see me as a person with dreams. They saw me as a spare resource. A piggy bank to be smashed open when the favorite son needed cash. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. Money can be earned. Loans can be taken. It was the absolute, casual certainty with which they had decided that my future was less valuable than Mason's whims. They hadn't even asked me. They had simply taken it, assuming I would just nod and accept my place as the supporting character in the movie of Mason's life. I felt a coldness settle over me, a chilling clarity that dried the tears before they could fall. I have to go, I said, turning toward the stairs. Don't be dramatic, Matthew called after me, his voice annoyed. We're having dinner in an hour. Mason is coming over to show us the beta version. Sit down, Anna. I didn't answer. I walked up the stairs, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The betrayal was worse th. And the diagnosis itself, it was a terminal severance of the family bond. I packed 2 suitcases. That was it. I left the yearbooks, the trophies, the clothes Margaret had bought me because they were appropriate for a young lady. I took my laptop, my documents, and the few clothes I had bought with my own money from summer jobs. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the back door while they were in the living room, likely setting the table for Mason's arrival. I got into my 10-year-old sedan, drove 3 towns over, and slept in a Walmart parking lot because I didn't have the money for a motel. The next morning, I withdrew the meager $2,000 I had in my personal checking account, money they hadn't been able to access, and started driving toward the city where my graduate program was located. The next 5 years were a blur of caffeine, cortisol, and crushing debt. I didn't just take student loans, I maxed them out. I worked 3 jobs, barista at 5 a.m., library assistant between classes, and a graveyard shift data entry clerk on weekends. I lived in a basement apartment with no windows and a ceiling that leaked brown water whenever the upstairs neighbors showered. I ate instant noodles until the smell made me gag. But I had something that kept me warm on the coldest nights: rage. Pure, refined, high-octane rage. Every time I paid a tuition bill with money I had to borrow at 8% interest, I thought of Matthew and Margaret sitting in their paid-off house, drinking wine and toasting to Mason's potential. Every time I declined a social invitation because I couldn't afford a $5 beer, I thought of Mason's Instagram stories. Ski trips to Aspen, business dinners at steakhouses, the leased BMW he drove to look the part for investors. I didn't block their numbers, but I never answered. They left voicemails. First, they were angry, "How dare you walk out on us?" Then, they were dismissive, "You're being childish, call us when you're done throwing a tantrum." Eventually, the calls stopped, replaced by the occasional generic birthday text that I deleted without reading. I funneled that rage into my work. I specialized in forensic accounting. I didn't just want to count money, I wanted to find where it was hidden. I wanted to learn the anatomy of deceit. I became obsessed with fraud, embezzlement, and asset tracing. I learned how people hid things, how they cooked books, and more importantly, how to catch them. By 32, I was a senior associate at one of the top firms in the city. My name, Anna, was whispered with fear in corporate boardrooms. If I was called in to audit your books, it meant you were already done. I was ruthless, meticulous, and expensive. I bought a condo, a sleek, modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. I wore tailored suits that cost more than my first car. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes they had left me in, brick by gold-plated brick. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Forensic accountants don't just look at the present. We reconstruct the past to predict the future. I had kept tabs on them. Not emotionally, but financially. It's amazing what public records can tell you if you know where to look. I knew Mason's startup had pivoted 4 times in 6 years. I knew he had never turned a profit. I knew Matthew and Margaret had taken out a second mortgage on their house 5 years ago, likely to bail Mason out of a cash flow issue. Then, 2 months ago, the alert I had set up on my computer pinged. A notice of default. Matthew and Margaret hadn't paid their mortgage in 6 months. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. The house, the symbol of their status, the collateral for Mason's dreams, was hitting the auction block as a distressed asset. I sat in my office, the blue light of the monitor illuminating my face, and smiled. I didn't call them. I called my lawyer. I set up a blind trust, an anonymous legal entity that couldn't be traced back to me without a court order. "Buy the note," I told my lawyer. "The whole mortgage?" he asked. "It's a risky asset, Anna. The property value has dipped, and the occupants are hostile to repayment." "I'm not buying it for the investment," I said, swirling the ice in my scotch. I'm buying the leverage, purchase the debt from the bank. I want to be the one they owe. 3 weeks later, I owned the deed to my childhood home. They didn't know it was me. They just knew their debt had been sold to a holding company called Nemesis LLC. And then the phone rang. It wasn't a blocked number. It was Matthew. It was the first time he had called in 3 years. I let it ring until the very last second, then swiped green. Hello. My voice was cool, professional, the voice I used for clients who were about to go to prison. Anna, Matthew's voice sounded older, thinner. There was a tremor in it I had never heard before. Is that you? It's me, Matthew. What do you want? We need to see you, he stammered. It's a family emergency. We're in the city. We need to have dinner. Please, it's about Mason and us. I'm very busy, I said, checking my nails. Please, Anna, we have nowhere else to turn. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him sweat. Fine, the Chop House on 4th, Friday at 7 p.m., don't be late. I hung up. They thought they were coming to ask a favor. They didn't realize they were walking into a deposition. The Chop House was the kind of restaurant where the waiters wore tuxedos and the menu didn't list prices. I arrived 15 minutes early, secured the best table in the corner. Quiet, private, perfect for a scene, and ordered a bottle of vintage red wine that cost more than my monthly food budget had been in grad school. I watched them walk in. Time had not been kind to Matthew and Margaret. Matthew, once a towering figure of arrogance, looked shrunken. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, hanging loosely off his frame as if he had lost 20 pounds rapidly. His hair was entirely white. Margaret looked brittle. Her face was tight with stress, her makeup applied a little too heavily in an attempt to mask the dark circles under her eyes. She clutched her handbag like a shield. And then there was Mason. He strode in behind them, and I had to suppress a laugh. He was 34 now, but he dressed like a 22-year-old tech bro from a bad movie. He wore a t-shirt under a blazer, distressed jeans, and sneakers that were deliberately untied. He had a patchy beard and wore sunglasses indoors, which he removed with a flourish as he scanned the room. Despite the family's obvious financial ruin, Mason looked fed. He looked rested. He looked like someone who had never lost a night's sleep over a bill in his life. I remained seated as they approached. Anna, Margaret breathed, her eyes darting around the luxurious restaurant. She looked at my suit, my jewelry, the bottle of wine. I saw the calculation happen in real time behind her eyes. She has money. Oh, look at you. You look expensive. Mother, I said, gesturing to the chairs. Father, Mason. Hey, sis, Mason said, sliding into the booth and immediately grabbing the wine list. Nice place. A bit old school for my taste, but it screams stable income, right? He winked at me. The audacity was breathtaking. Sit down, Matthew said to him, his voice weary. He looked at me with watery eyes. Thank you for meeting us, Anna. I know we haven't been close. We haven't spoken in a decade because you stole my inheritance, I corrected him, taking a sip of wine. Let's not rewrite history. You said it was a family emergency. I have an early morning tomorrow. Speak. Margaret flinched at my tone, but Mason just poured himself a glass of my wine without asking. Straight to business. I respect that, Mason said, leaning back and spreading his arms. Look, Anna, here's the situation. The startup ecosystem is brutal right now. The market is correcting. My venture, CloudSync, it was ahead of its time, really. But the burn rate was higher than anticipated, and the VCs got cold feet. He means he spent all the money and produced nothing. I translated for my parents. I pivoted, Mason snapped, his facade slipping for a second. You don't understand disruption, Anna. You're a bean counter. You look at what is, I look at what could be. Anyway, we hit a liquidity crunch. A liquidity crunch, I repeated. Is that what they call foreclosure these days? The table went silent. Matthew's face went gray. How did you know? I'm a forensic accountant, Dad. Knowing things is my job. I know the house is in foreclosure. I know your retirement accounts are drained. I know you have maxed out 5 credit cards. And I know Mason here has been leasing a Tesla while you two have been skipping heart medication to pay the electric bill." Margaret let out a small sob. He needed a car for meetings, Anna. Appearance matters. So, I leaned forward, clasping my hands. "You're broke, you're about to be homeless, and you're sitting here across from the daughter you discarded, drinking her $100 wine. Why?" Matthew took a deep breath. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crinkled folder. "We need a loan, Anna, just a bridge loan to save the house and to give Mason one last runway. He has a new idea, it's blockchain-based. If we can just fund the prototype, he can sell it to Google within 6 months. We can pay you back everything. The house, the college fund, with interest." I stared at them. It was pathological. Even at the edge of the abyss, with the ground crumbling beneath their feet, they were still trying to throw their last lifeline to Mason. They weren't asking me to save them. They were asking me to save him so he could pretend to save them later. Mason leaned in, giving me a charming, practiced smile. "Come on, Anna, you're clearly loaded. What's 50 grand to you? Or maybe 80? Think of it as an angel investment. I'll give you equity, preferred stock." "You want me to invest in the person who robbed me?" I said flatly. "We didn't rob you," Margaret hissed, looking around to see if anyone was listening. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And now, when your family is in crisis, when your brother is on the verge of a breakthrough, you're going to hold a grudge about money from 10 years ago." "Yes," I said, "I am." Mason scoffed, rolling his eyes. "God, you're bitter. You always were. You know, Mom and Dad always said you lacked vision. That's why they bet on me. Because I'm special, Anna. I'm going to change the world. You're just maintaining the status quo." He reached for a bread roll, tearing it apart aggressively. "But fine, be a bitch. We don't need your charity. We just thought you'd want to be on the right side of history when I ring the opening bell at NASDAQ." "Mason, stop," Matthew whispered, his head in his hands. "Anna, please, they're going to evict us in 3 weeks. The bank sold the note to some investment firm. They're aggressive. We're going to be on the street. Your mother, she can't handle that." I looked at Matthew. I saw the terror in his eyes. He wasn't the arrogant patriarch anymore. He was a broken old man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. 3 weeks, I said softly. "Yes," Matthew pleaded. "If we can just pay off the arrears, maybe we can negotiate." "I see." I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a thick manila envelope I had brought from the office. This was the moment, the pivot point. They thought I was the prey, the mark, the estranged daughter looking for approval. They had no idea I was the predator. I placed the manila envelope on the white tablecloth. It landed with a heavy, deliberate thud that seemed to silence the ambient noise of the restaurant. The waiter approached to refill our water glasses, but one look at the tension radiating from our booth made him pivot and retreat. "What is this?" Matthew asked, his hand hovering over the envelope, trembling slightly. Is it the check?" "Open it," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. Matthew fumbled with the clasp. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The first page was a transfer of lien. The second was a notice of assignment of debt. He squinted at the papers, his brow furrowing as he tried to parse the legalese through his panic. "Nemesis LLC," he read aloud, his voice wavering. This says Nemesis LLC has purchased the outstanding mortgage note from the bank. I don't understand, Anna. Who are they? Did you talk to them? Did you get them to hold off?" "Look at the signature line on the second page, Dad," I said softly. He flipped the page. He froze. His eyes widened, darting from the paper to my face and back again. He looked like a man trying to solve a physics equation while falling from a plane. "Authorized signatory, Anna," he trailed off. You are Nemesis LLC." Margaret snatched the paper from his hand. What does that mean?" "It means," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, "that the bank doesn't own your house anymore. I do. I bought your debt 3 weeks ago. I am your creditor. I am your landlord. And currently you are 6 months in arrears." You bought our mortgage? Mason laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. No way, you don't have that kind of capital. You're an accountant, Anna, you make a salary. Buying a distress note takes liquid cash. Serious cash. I'm a forensic accountant, Mason. I'm a partner at a firm that handles high net worth restructuring. And unlike you, I invest my money, I don't set it on fire. I turned back to my parents. I own the roof over your heads. I hold the deed. I can foreclose tomorrow. I can have the sheriff verify the eviction by Monday morning. You wouldn't, Margaret whispered, clutching her pearls. We are your parents. You wouldn't put us on the street. You put me on the street, I reminded her. 10 years ago, you emptied my account and watched me walk out the door with 2 suitcases. You didn't call. You didn't check if I had a place to sleep. You assumed I'd figure it out. Now I'm returning the favor. I'm assuming you'll figure it out. Anna, please, Matthew said, tears finally spilling over. We were desperate. We made mistakes, but we're family. We were family, I corrected. Now we are a business transaction, and in business, leverage is everything. I took a sip of wine, savoring the bouquet. However, I am not unreasonable. I am willing to suspend the foreclosure proceedings. I am willing to renegotiate the terms of your loan. I might even be persuaded to forgive the interest. Anything, Matthew said, grasping my hand across the table. His grip was clammy. We'll do anything. Thank you, Anna. I knew you had a good heart. I pulled my hand away. I have conditions, strict, non-negotiable conditions, and they start with him. I pointed a manicured finger at Mason. Mason bristled. Me, what do I have to do with this? Everything, I said. For the last 5 years, I haven't just been working, I've been watching. When I saw the foreclosure notice, I didn't just buy the debt blindly. I did what I do best. I investigated. I hired a private investigator to look into CloudSync and your various other ventures. I pulled public records. I looked at your UCC filings. I know you've been soliciting investment from Dad's friends. I know you've been taking advances from Mom's credit cards. That's standard bootstrapping, Mason yelled, slamming his hand on the table. You're invading my privacy. You're trying to sabotage me because you're jealous that I'm actually building something while you're just a corporate drone. I want full access, I said, ignoring his outburst and locking eyes with Matthew. I want access to every bank account, every ledger, every credit card statement associated with Mason and your household. I am going to conduct a forensic audit of where exactly the money went. If you want to keep your house, you will authorize me to see the books. Right now. You can't do that, Mason stood up. My intellectual property is sensitive. I have trade secrets. Sit down, Mason, Matthew snapped. It was the first time I had heard him raise his voice at his son in my life. The fear of losing the house had finally outweighed his blind adoration. Anna, if we give you access, you'll save the house. If you give me access, I will consider it, I said. But if you walk out that door, or if Mason refuses to sign the release, I will have the locks changed on Tuesday. Mason looked at his parents. He saw the desperation in their eyes. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his shield was cracking. He sat down, sulking like a teenager. Fine, he spat. Look at the books. You won't find anything except legitimate business expenses. R&D is expensive. You wouldn't understand. I smiled. It was a shark smile. Oh, Mason, I understand better than anyone. The audit didn't happen in an office. It happened right there at the table. I had come prepared. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out the second stack of documents, the result of my investigator's work and the preliminary subpoenas I had filed as the debt holder. I anticipated you might say that, I said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table toward Matthew and Margaret. So I took the liberty of running a preliminary trace on the funds you transferred to Mason's LLC over the last 24 months. This is illegal, Mason hissed, trying to grab the paper. I slapped his hand away. Actually, since the funds came from a home equity line of credit on a property I now own the debt for, I have a legal right to verify the collateral's stability. Read it, Dad. Item number 4. Matthew put on his reading glasses. His hands were shaking so badly the paper vibrated. Date, November 14th. Amount, $12,000. Recipient, CloudSync Operations. Okay, Matthew looked up hopeful. That sounds right, operations, servers, coding. Look at the subnote, Dad, I said. My team traced the corresponding debit from the CloudSync account. Where did that $12,000 go the very next day? Matthew squinted. Payment to Exotic Escapades. It's a luxury travel agency, I explained calmly. That $12,000 didn't buy server space. It bought a 10-day all-inclusive stay at a 5-star resort in Cholum. For two. Mason, was that a business trip? Or was that for you and that Instagram model you were dating? It was a networking retreat, Mason shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. Investors hang out in Cholum. You have to be where the money is. I pitched to 3 angel investors by the pool. Did you get any funding? I asked. It's a long cycle. You don't just get a check on the spot. Item number 9, I commanded. Read it, Mom. Margaret looked at the sheet, her face pale. $7,000. Hardware acquisition. Sounds legitimate, I said. Except the debit wasn't to Apple or Dell. It was to Rolex of Beverly Hills. Silence, absolute dead silence. Margaret looked at Mason. Mason, you bought a watch with the money we gave you for the prototype. I need to look successful, Mason pleaded, his voice cracking. Mom, you know how these people are. If I show up in a Casio, they laugh me out of the room. It's an asset. It holds value. It was a strategic purchase to build the brand image. You're wearing it right now, aren't you? I pointed to his wrist. That's my college fund on your wrist, Mason. That's Mom's retirement. That's the reason Dad is driving a car with a check engine light that's been on for 2 years. You are twisting everything. Mason stood up again, knocking over H. Is wine glass. The red liquid stained the white tablecloth like a spreading wound. You're framing standard CEO expenses as theft. I am the CEO. I have discretion over company funds. Not when the funds are solicited under false pretenses, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. That's called fraud, Mason, and I'm just getting started. I flipped the page. Let's talk about the office space rent, $3,000 a month for a WeWork office, right? That's what you told them. Mason went silent. He looked at the door. He was looking for an exit. Dad, I said, the address listed for the office. Do you recognize it? Matthew looked at the address. 1402 Highland. Wait, isn't that the luxury apartment complex downtown? The one with the rooftop pool? Yes, I said. Mason isn't renting an office. He's renting a penthouse apartment for himself. He's been living there for 2 years, paying the rent with the money you gave him to keep the lights on at the business. I work from home, Mason screamed. It's a dual-use space. It's tax-deductible. You told us you were sleeping on a friend's couch to save money, Margaret whispered. Her voice was broken. The denial was finally shattering under the weight of the evidence. You told us you were suffering for your art. You told us you were hungry. I was hungry, Mason yelled. Hungry for success, which none of you understand. You're all small, you're all mediocre. I am trying to build an empire here, and you're busting my balls over rent. You aren't building an empire, I said, standing up to meet his eyes. You're building a pyramid scheme, and the only people at the bottom are Mom and Dad. I'm leaving, Mason announced. He threw his napkin on the table. I don't have to listen to this. I have a meeting with a serious investor at 9 p.m., someone who actually believes in me. Sit down, I ordered. Or what? Mason sneered. You'll ground me. Or I'll call the district attorney, I said. Because the investor you're meeting, I know about him too, but that's not the worst part. The worst part is what I found in the miscellaneous folder. Mason froze. The mention of the district attorney had an immediate physical effect on him. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. He slowly sank back into the booth. What are you talking about? Matthew asked. He looked like he was having a heart attack. He was clutching his chest, his breathing shallow. District Attorney? Anna, stop. You've made your point. He's been irresponsible. He's been selfish. But let's not bring the law into this. It's too late for that, Dad, I said. Because Mason didn't just steal from you. If he had only drained your accounts, it would be a family tragedy. But he got greedy. He started looking for other sources of revenue when your wells ran dry. I pulled out the final document. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a sworn affidavit. Do you know Mrs. Gable, your neighbor 2 doors down, the widow? Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, Martha, she's 80 years old. She's a lovely woman. Mason used to mow her lawn when he was a teenager. Mason paid her a visit 6 months ago, I said, reading from the document. He told her he was opening a secure, high-yield tech bond exclusive to friends and family. He promised her a 15% return, guaranteed. He told her it was safer than a bank. I looked at Mason. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. She gave him her life savings, I continued. $50,000. She wrote him a check. She thought she was helping the nice boy from next door build his future. She thought her money was safe. I'm going to pay her back, Mason mumbled. As soon as the Series A funding comes through, it was a loan, a short-term bridge loan. There is no Series A, Mason? I slammed my hand on the table, making the silverware jump. There is no product. There is no code. I had my team audit your GitHub repository. It's empty. You haven't written a line of code in 3 years. You took Martha's money and you used it to make the lease payments on your Tesla and pay off your gambling debts. Gambling debts, Margaret gasped. She looked as if she had been slapped. Online poker, I confirmed. I found the transfers. Thousands of dollars a week. While you two were eating generic brand soup to save pennies, he was losing thousands of dollars on his phone, sitting in his penthouse, drinking champagne bought with Mrs. Gable's medicine money. It's wire fraud, I said, looking at my father. It's elder abuse. It's securities fraud. If Mrs. Gable goes to the police, Mason goes to federal prison for 10 years. Minimum. Matthew put his head on the table and began to weep. It was a guttural, ugly sound, the sound of a man realizing his entire legacy was a lie. Margaret just stared at Mason, her mouth slightly open, as if seeing a stranger. You lied, Margaret whispered. You looked me in the eye, Mason. You swore on your grandmother's grave that you were working 20 hours a day. You swore you were close. I am close, Mason shouted, but the conviction was gone. He sounded like a frightened child. I just needed more time, if Anna hadn't interfered, if she had just given me the loan. If I had given you the loan, you would have gambled that away too, I said. You are a black hole, Mason. You consume everything around you. You consumed my college fund. You consumed Mom and Dad's retirement. You consumed their house. And now you've consumed their reputation because when the neighbors find out what you did to Martha, Mom and Dad won't be able to show their faces in that town again. So here is the deal, I said, leaning in. The restaurant was watching us now, but I didn't care. The shame was theirs, not mine. I have prepared a confession, I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. It details the fraud against Mrs. Gable. It details the misappropriation of family funds. It admits that CloudSync is a shell company with no assets. I'm not signing that, Mason said, shaking his head frantically. That's suicide. If you sign it, I said, I will personally repay Mrs. Gable her $50,000 tomorrow morning. I will frame it as a misunderstanding, a failed investment that the family is covering. She won't press charges. You will avoid prison. Mason looked at the paper, then at me. And what else? You will dissolve the company, I listed. You will break the lease on the penthouse and move out within 48 hours. You will sell the Tesla. And you will sign over any and all future claims to Mom and Dad's estate. You are cut off. Completely. Forever. You get a job, a real job, at a gas station or a warehouse, and you start paying them back every cent you stole. Dad, Mason turned to Matthew. You can't let her do this. She's trying to ruin me. She's trying to control me." Matthew lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw the watch, the clothes, the arrogance. Then he looked at me, the daughter he had abandoned, who was now the only thing standing between them and total ruin. "Sign it," Matthew croaked. "Dad," Mason's voice trembled. "Sign the paper, Mason," Matthew said, his voice gaining a sudden, terrible strength. "Or so help me God, I will drive you to the police station myself." Mason looked around the table. He saw no allies, he saw no escape. The golden boy was finally, utterly alone. He picked up the pen. The silence at the table was thick with the ghost of 1,000 lies. Mason held the pen, his hand trembling so violently that the tip tapped a frantic rhythm against the tablecloth. He looked at Matthew one last time, searching for the indulgent father who had always bailated him out, who had always believed the next big thing was just around the corner. But that man was gone, replaced by a stranger with eyes full of grief and a jaw set in stone. "You can't be serious," Mason whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, Mom, this is insane. She's twisting your arm. She's jealous. Can't you see that? She's always been jealous of me." "Jealous?" Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was unrecognizable, hollow, stripped of the manic cheerfulness she usually wore like armor. "Jealous of what, Mason? Of the lies? Of the theft? Of the way you looked me in the eye and took my retirement while you were buying watches?" She reached across the table and touched the Rolex on his wrist. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent, but then her fingers curled around the metal band and she yanked. Mason yelped as she tried to pull it off him. "Give it back," she hissed. "That's not yours, that's my life. That's your father's heart medication. Give it back." "Mom, stop, you're making a scene." Mason tried to pull away, but Margaret held on with a desperate strength. "Take it off," Matthew barked, slamming his fist on the table. The sound echoed through the restaurant, silencing the nearby diners. "Take off the watch, take off the sunglasses, and sign the damn paper." Mason shrank back, genuinely terrified. He fumbled with the clasp of the watch, sliding it off and dropping it onto the table with a clatter. It looked obscene there, gleaming under the ambient light next to the half-eaten bread rolls. He picked up the pen again. He signed the confession. He signed the dissolution papers. He signed the waiver to the estate. Each signature was a surrender, a chipping away of the false idol he had built for himself. "It's done," he muttered, shoving the papers toward me. "Happy now, you win, you ruined me." "I didn't ruin you, Mason," I said, gathering the documents and placing them neatly back into the manila envelope. "I just stopped you from ruining them any further." "Get out," Matthew said quietly. He didn't look at Mason. He was staring at his hands, folded on the table. "What?" Mason blinked. "But, where am I supposed to go? You heard her. I have to be out of the penthouse in 48 hours. I don't have anywhere else." "Get out." Matthew looked up and the fury in his eyes was terrifying. "I don't care where you go. Go to a shelter. Go to a friend. Go to hell for all I care. But get away from this table. Get away from us." Mason looked at Margaret. She turned her head away, staring out the window at the city lights. He stood up, looking small and pathetic in his designer clothes. He grabbed his jacket, hesitated for a moment as if expecting a reprieve, and then turned and walked out of the restaurant. He didn't look back. The golden child left not with a bang, but with a whimper, disappearing into the night he had tried so hard to conquer. The three of us sat in silence for a long time. The waiter, sensing the storm had passed, cautiously approached and cleared the plates. "I'm sorry," Matthew said finally. He didn't look at me. He was still staring at the spot where Mason had been sitting. "God, Anna, I am so sorry." "I don't need your apology, Dad," I said, my voice steady but tired. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. "I need your compliance. You have a repayment plan to stick to." "We will," Margaret whispered. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "We will pay you back, every cent, even if it takes the rest of our lives." "It probably will," I said. "And that's fine. Because this time, the money isn't going into a black hole. It's going into a trust, for your care when you're older, since Mason clearly won't be providing it." They both looked up at me, shocked. You're keeping the payments," Matthew asked. "I'm your landlord now," I reminded them. "But I'm not a monster. The rent you pay me, it goes into an account in your name. I control it. I invest it. If you need medical care, if you need groceries, the money is there. But you never, ever get access to the principal again, and neither does Mason." Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. Her hand was warm, shaking slightly. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for saving us from ourselves." The next 6 months were a blur of logistics and legalities. I evicted Mason from the penthouse myself, overseeing the movers as they packed up his empire. It fit into 10 boxes. The furniture was rented. The art was fake. The only thing of value was the view, and he lost that too. I sold the Tesla and put the proceeds toward Mrs. Gable's repayment. I made up the difference myself, framing it as a family restructuring. Mrs. Gable was just happy to have her nest egg back. She didn't ask questions. Mason avoided prison, but he didn't avoid consequences. With a fraud confession in his file, he couldn't get a loan, a credit card, or a job in finance. Last I heard, he was working at a car rental agency near the airport, washing sedans for minimum wage. Matthew and Margaret aged 10 years in those 6 months, but they also found a strange kind of peace. The secrecy was gone. The pressure to maintain the facade of the successful family had evaporated. They lived in their house, my house, and they paid me rent on the first of every month. I visited them occasionally. It wasn't warm. It wasn't like the movies. We didn't hug and laugh about old times, but we had dinner. We talked about the weather, about my job, about the garden. It was a relationship built on transparency, if not affection. I still work as a forensic accountant. I still hunt down fraud. But now, when I find a hidden account or a cooked book, I don't feel the old rage. I feel a sense of professional satisfaction. I know that somewhere, someone is trying to pull a fast one, and somewhere, someone like me is waiting to catch them. I kept the Rolex. It sits on my desk in my office, a heavy gold paperweight. It reminds me every day that value isn't what you show the world, it's what you actually possess. And the most valuable thing I own isn't the watch, or the condo, or the deed to my parents' house. It's the knowledge that I built my life with my own hands, on my own terms. And no one can ever reallocate that.